What's up, everyone? It is Josh over here with the Manchise, and we are going to be breaking down UFC Fight Night. Pedro Munhoz versus Frankie Edgar. Of course, Frankie Edgar is making his bantamweight debut. Much anticipated. He's been talking about dropping down to that bantamweight division for a while now, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that goes. He is a little bit older at this point in his career. Frankie Edgar's been around for a while, but I was always one of those guys that believed that he needed to make that move, especially in the modern UFC where fighters are really cutting a lot of weight, in all honesty, to fight at the lowest weight that they can really potentially make. So I'm excited to see what Frankie Edgar does. And Pedro Munhoz, I know his last fight against Aljamain Sterling was a disappointing one for him, where he got choked out. But of course, the fight before that, where he knocked out Cody Garbrandt, that was super impressive. Man, this is going to be a weird card. There's already been a ton of movement here, which is one of the reasons why I decided to wait a little bit before I released this video. Just the way things were shaking out, fighters kind of been dropping off left and right. I mean, starting all the way back with when the fight card was really first announced, and Michelle Waterson and Angela Hill were supposed to be on it. Yoel Romero and Uriah Hall were supposed to be on this card. All of those fights fell through, but there's still 11 fights on this card for us to break down, and there's some short notice replacements on here that I want to take advantage of when it comes to DraftKings. So we'll definitely do that. Just want to recap last week. Man, I apologize, guys. The card that I put out in my video last week did not do well. And honestly, I blame myself, man. Like, in my video, I said, hey, I really like Stipe, but then I give you guys a lineup that includes Daniel Cormier and ignores Stipe Miocic. So hopefully you still listen to some of my analysis. I really didn't have that bad of a night, in all honesty, in DraftKings. Just about broke even. Made a little bit more money than I ended up wagering. I don't know if that's really a win. I mean, it's certainly not a loss, but when you take the time to put together a bunch of cards and you basically end up breaking even, just not very exciting. But either way, last week's card, UFC 252, ended up being a decent card. I think the O'Malley-Vera fight, it was unfortunate to see Sean O'Malley go out like that, but it was nice to see Stipe Miocic retain his title. Enough about last week. I want to focus on this weekend's card, and these are the cards that you can really make some money off of, right? Because there's going to be a lot of fighters that people just don't know who they are, right? They don't have a ton of experience, so there's definitely some matchups that we want to exploit. We're going to start off with the main event here, which is that bantamweight fight between Pedro Munhoz and Frankie Edgar. Now, for a while there was a rumor that this was always going to only be a 3-5 minute round fight. That is not the case. They are scheduled for 5-5s, which is great, especially for DFS. I want to take a look at Frankie Edgar first. I've already talked a little bit about him. He's coming off of back-to-back losses. A year ago, he fought Max Holloway, lost that fight, went the distance. And then 7 months ago, he fought Chan Sung Jung, of course, the Korean Zombie, and he was knocked out. So he's been on a little bit of a decline here, a little bit of a struggle. He is 2-3 in his last 5 UFC fights. He also lost to Brian Ortega about 2.5 years ago, and that was that vicious uppercut that just put him out. And it's really a shame because Edgar looked pretty decent in that fight to start off, really controlling the distance, utilizing his quickness and speed with his boxing, in and out, coming in to land strikes and then out of range, and Ortega just caught him on his way in with that vicious uppercut. The victories in his last 5 fights, well, he has a decision win over Cub Swanson, and he also knocked out Yair Rodriguez, and that was 3 years ago. And in that fight, Frankie Edgar's grappling and wrestling was just it was just on another level. Like, Yair Rodriguez had no answer for it. He was able to just get the fight to the mat and land that vicious ground and pound. I mean, Frankie Edgar now has been in the UFC. He's a former UFC champion. He's fought the who's who, really, in the featherweight division. Has victories over guys like Jeremy Stevens, Chad Mendez, Uriah Faber, BJ Penn, Charles Oliveira. I mean, this guy just has a wealth of experience. For Pedro Munhoz, as I pointed out, about a year ago, he fought Aljamain Sterling. He was choked. That one went the distance. Yeah, I'm already starting off on the wrong foot, man. I would correct myself. I thought he lost that fight, or was finished in that fight. So anyway, he went the distance with Aljamain Sterling. A year and a half ago, he, of course, knocked out Cody Garbrandt. I won't forget that. I'm a big Cody fan. He also has victories over Brett Johns. He finished Brian Caraway. I mean, Pedro Munhoz is a UFC veteran at this point. He's looked really good in the UFC. I mean, he finished Rob Font. He had some tough losses sprinkled in there. I know he lost a split decision victory. It was pretty razor thin to John Dodson. And split decision loss to Jimmy Rivera as well. This should be, I think, a pretty high action fight. Both these guys have really solid striking skills, and they're high output fighters, which is what I love to see. I want to go over some stats before we get into the betting analysis and even look at this fight from a DFS perspective. So we'll start with Frankie Edgar's striking stats: 3.6 significant strikes landed per minute, 40% striking accuracy, 2.48 strikes absorbed. For Munhoz, 5.29 strikes landed per minute, 42% striking accuracy, 6.17 strikes absorbed, and that number that's a surprising number. In the grappling department, Frankie Edgar, 2.34 takedowns per 15 minutes, 31% takedown accuracy, 65% takedown defense. For Munhoz, 0.92 takedowns per 15 minutes, 21% takedown accuracy, 81% takedown defense. When it comes to their BJJ skills, I would definitely give the edge to Pedro Munhoz. We've seen him be able to finish some tough competition in the UFC with some decent chokes. So Vegas has Pedro Munhoz here as a favorite. Minus 255 at this point. I think he opened up around minus 235, minus 240. So some money has definitely come down on Pedro Munhoz. That doesn't surprise me too much. I mean, Frankie Edgar is now 38 years old, and he's on a 2-fight losing streak, and his most recent loss was that one against the Korean Zombie where he was knocked out cold. And you couple that with the vicious knockout that he faced against Brian Ortega, and at this point you got to start questioning Frankie Edgar's chin. The good news is Brian Ortega and Korean Zombie and Max Holloway, those guys are much larger fighters than a guy like Pedro Munhoz, who is the same height as Frankie Edgar. They're both 5'6". So really, this is the first time that we're going to see Frankie Edgar, fight a fighter that he's not at a disadvantage from a size perspective in the ring. So we will see if that works in his favor. Now, one of the things that I do want to mention is I want to see how Frankie Edgar looks on the scales. Whenever you're 38 years old and you're dropping down a division, that's generally not a good sign. I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I've already mentioned to you guys multiple times here that I think this is the right move. Generally, I would be a little bit leery with someone this late in their career dropping divisions, but I mean, for years and years and years, Frankie Edgar has faced these questions about, hey, you ever think about dropping down to bantamweight? Because that's honestly the weight class that he needs to be fighting in. I like Munhoz to win this fight. I don't know if I'd bet minus 255 though, and the reason for that is because Frankie, we haven't seen Frankie at this weight class. He's going to have a pretty significant reach advantage. I believe it's going to be somewhere around 6 to 7 inches. And Frankie's a very well-rounded fighter, right? He's got good boxing skills. He's got good wrestling. He's got a good wrestling background. He's decent when it comes to jiu-jitsu. I mean, he trains with Ricardo Almeida over there in Toms River, New Jersey. I would say he's beyond decent. I would say he's a very good jiu-jitsu practitioner. Is he on Pedro Munhoz's level? Probably not. The thing with me when it comes to breaking down this fight is, where do I feel Frankie Edgar has an advantage at this point in his career? And I would say really the only area that he may have an advantage is in his wrestling. And I think he needs to really rely on this. The tricky thing is if you take Pedro Munhoz down, then, you could be setting yourself up to submission attempts from Pedro Munhoz. And, his jiu-jitsu is slick, man. So I think Frankie Edgar is savvy enough, and he's a veteran. He knows how to avoid putting himself in those dangerous positions. If I'm Frankie Edgar, I probably feel this one out first from a striking perspective, just because of that reach advantage. If Frankie can control the distance, he does have good boxing skills. If it gets too scrappy, then I think Frankie Edgar will have the ability to rely on his wrestling. He might be able to take this fight down to the mat. This is a tough one because Edgar's such an unknown at this weight class. So, I lean Pedro Munhoz, right? He's the younger fighter. He's definitely been more successful as of late, but it would not shock me at all if Frankie Edgar won, which is why I would not recommend betting Pedro Munhoz at minus 255. Let's talk about this fight from a DraftKings perspective. That's why most of you guys tune in. We're just trying to get right back on the right track here and keep on making some money. So Pedro Munhoz is one of the most pricey fighters on this card at $9,000, and Frankie Edgar is one of the cheaper options at $7,200. For Pedro Munhoz, he's a high output fighter. His loss against Sterling, he put up 53 points. It's pretty solid. 53 points for a loss in a 3-round fight, decent. And then the 116 banger against Garbrandt, 118 against Caraway, 131 against Johns. Pedro Munhoz is not someone that I would recommend fading this week. I'm definitely going to have some exposure to him because this card doesn't have a ton of talent in that 9,000 price point range. And the fact that this fight is going 5 rounds, it should really lead to Pedro Munhoz having the ability or potential to really put up a bunch of points. And this is actually a card where you could certainly stack these fighters. So let's talk about Frankie Edgar at 7,200. He had that stinker against Korean Zombie, 5 points, and the stinker against Ortega, 14 points. But Frankie Edgar, he can definitely put up a ton of points. He had 170 against Cub Swanson the first time they fought, 103 against Faber, 107 against Mendez, 95 against Jeremy Stevens, only 53 against Holloway, but again, that was a loss, and that one went the distance. So I like Frankie Edgar on this slate because there's a lot of short notice replacement fighters that you're going to have to take a chance on someone in the low 7,000s. And I'd rather take a chance on a fighter who's a former UFC champion, is going to be in a 5-round fight. And, even though his chin has been suspect, again, he's going down in weight. Pedro Munhoz, outside of the Cody Garbrandt knockout, it's not like Pedro Munhoz throws bombs all the time. That really turned into a brawl. I don't expect to see it to get that reckless in this one. So I'll definitely have some Edgar ownership. I'll definitely have some Munhoz ownership. And I wouldn't mind stacking those guys, especially if you're playing in cash. If you're playing in cash, a stack is not a bad idea. All right, so we're going to move on to the co-main event, which is Ovince St. Preux versus Alonzo Menifield, taking place in the light heavyweight division. Looks like Ovince St. Preux's heavyweight experiment didn't last long. After that loss to Ben Rothwell, he's dropping back down to 205. And this is a short notice fight for Alonzo Menifield. Menifield's got a record of 9-1. Fought just 2 months ago against Devin Clark. He's a pretty big favorite in that fight and took a loss, went the distance. Menifield was able to land some pretty big shots early, but Devin Clark withered the storm, and Menifield's gas tank just was on E for the rest of that fight. And Devin Clark was able to pick up the victory. But before that, Menifield had a knockout victory over Paul Craig and a knockout victory over Vinicius Mojeda. So Menifield has bombs, right? This guy throws bombs, a ton of power. The issue with Menifield is, no one knew what he would look like if a fight made it past the first round. And we got our first glimpse of that against Devin Clark. And it wasn't good. It wasn't pretty. Menifield was just like a zombie out there, man. Just nothing behind his strikes. For Ovince St. Preux, he had that split decision loss three months ago to Ben Rothwell. Before that, he had a submission victory over Michael Olajaychuk. Always have trouble pronouncing that guy's names. And that was an impressive victory because Olajaychuk, up until that point in the UFC, looked pretty slick with his striking and looked good, even though he was a smaller light heavyweight. OSP was subbed by Nikita Krylov. He also lost a fight against Dominic Reyes, and that fight went the distance, which now looks pretty impressive. The fact that he was able to go the distance and strike back and forth with Dominic Reyes. But Ovince St. Preux, man, this guy has been a professional and a veteran here in the UFC. He's fought a bunch of the top contending light heavyweights. He even had a title fight himself against John Jones. Notable victories over guys like Corey Anderson, Tyson Pedro, Patrick Cummins, Shogun. The guy's fought who's who. He definitely is going to have an experience advantage in this fight. He has a size advantage in this fight. And the other thing is he's had an entire training camp, right? And Menifield hasn't. So the odds in this one are a little bit interesting to me. I want to pull up some of the stats here. Ovince St. Preux, 2.6 strikes landed per minute, 46% striking accuracy, 2.91 strikes absorbed. For Menifield, 3.75 strikes landed per minute, 47% striking accuracy, 3.75 strikes absorbed. When it comes to grappling, Ovince St. Preux, 1.25 takedowns per 15 minutes, 40% takedown accuracy, 65% takedown defense. For Alonzo Menifield, we haven't really seen too much grappling. He's a guy that likes to keep the fight standing up, but he does have an 85% takedown defense, which is a solid number. Vegas is looking at this fight as Alonzo Menifield is a minus 130 favorite. Ovince St. Preux is a plus 110 underdog, and I really think OSP is a live dog here. When I look at OSP, and of course, he's taken some losses in the UFC. He was choked out by Krylov. He was choked out by Latifi. He was choked out by Glover Teixeira. But most of the L's that he's taken are fights that have gone the distance. When he lost to Ben Rothwell, when he lost to Dominic Reyes, when he lost to Özdemir, lost to John Jones. That fight went the distance. The last time that Ovince St. Preux was finished from a punch was all the way back in 2016 when Jimmy Manuwa was able to finish him. So OSP has only really been knocked out twice in his career, and one of those times was very early on, all the way back in 2009, so I don't even really count that. If you're going to survive fights against John Jones, Dominic Reyes, Volkan Özdemir, guys that have really legit power, then Menifield, not to take anything away from him, but Benefield's not going to bring anything to the table that OSP's never seen before. And the fact that Benefield is taking this fight on short notice really scares me, especially because his last fight, he had no gas tank, and now you're telling me he's got to come in here and fight a veteran in OSP that he's not even going to have the ability to have a full training camp to build up that stamina. And it's a quick turnaround too. It's not like this guy's been sitting on the sidelines for 6 months training and then just happens to fill in for a fight. I mean, we just saw Benefield fight 2 months ago. So, I understand Benefield probably after that poor showing wants to get back into the ring as soon as possible and prove that was just a fluke. But I don't know if in 2 months you can build up your stamina to that degree. You could certainly improve upon your stamina, but I mean, this guy was on E after the first couple minutes of his last fight. So I like Ovince St. Preux here. Another thing is we haven't really seen Benefield on the ground. When he's been taken down, he's been able to get back up. He hasn't really fought anyone with the same credentials in jiu-jitsu as Ovince St. Preux. And, this could be a sneaky Ovince St. Preux Von Flue choke finish, man. The St. Preux choke. All right, so let's look at this one from a DFS perspective. So these odds are pretty close. Alonzo Menefield's 8,300. Ovince St. Preux is 7,900. Now, this is a difficult one to talk about when it comes to DFS because even though I'm pretty confident in St. Preux here, he's not the greatest DFS player, right? Because he's not necessarily a high output fighter. Yeah, when he gets those submission victories, he can put up 80 to 90 points. But in the fights that St. Preux's in that go the distance, it's not pretty. 31 points against Rothwell, 24 against Reyes, Oezdemir 38 points. So he's not a high output fighter. So you really are looking for a submission in this one. And I think it's something that is possible that he can pull off. So I will still have a little bit of exposure to St. Preux because at that 7,900 price point, like I said, there's not a lot out there this week because of the just so many fighters dropping off of this card. I feel more comfortable taking St. Preux at 7,900 in hopes that he gets a win, hopefully pulls off the submission. Then I feel like taking another fighter in the 7,000 range that I feel as though would be more of a Hail Mary play. I guess the toughest decision for me to make this week would be, do I like St. Preux at 7,900? Do I like Austin Hubbard at 7,800 or even Amanda Lemos at 7,600? That's going to be those three fighters I'm going to probably have some exposure to, and I'm going to have to make some tough decisions there. Right now, I'm probably leaning St. Preux and Lemos. But we'll talk about that more down the line. For Benefield, 8,300, if you're playing GPPs, it's not a bad play because he's always a threat to knock someone out. In his first two UFC fights, 117 points, 94 points. I'm just scared that he doesn't, I don't think he pulls out a KO victory against St. Preux here. And I just never like playing DFS with fighters that have questionable gas tanks. So I probably will not have a ton of exposure to Alonzo Benefield. But if you're looking for some diversity in your lineups and you're playing in GPPs, it's not a bad idea to throw him in there because he could be a guy that could throw up 120 points, which that's going to pay up to that 8,300 salary. All right, so on this main card, we also have Mike Rodriguez versus Marcin Prachnio. This fight's taking place in the light heavyweight division as well. Mike Rodriguez has a 10-4 record. He's fighting Marcin Prachnio, who's got a 13-4 record, but is 0-2 in the UFC. Both of his losses, he was knocked out 2 years ago. He was knocked out by Sam Alvey. A year and about 11 months ago, he was also knocked out by Magomed Ankalaev. For Mike Rodriguez, he's now had, I believe, 4 fights in the UFC and 1 fight with the Contender Series. One on the Contender Series with a flying knee, and that sealed his ticket into the UFC. He lost his UFC debut to Devin Clark. That fight went the distance. He picked up a win against Adam Milstead. He was able to get a finish there. John Allen, unanimous decision fight. where I believe that fight he lost as well. Let me just take a peek at that. Might have been a no contest. Yeah, John Allen, no contest. And then in his most recent fight, Da Un Jung was able to finish him pretty early in the first round. So both of these guys have been finished in the UFC. I want to pull up some stats here for Mike Rodriguez. His striking stats: 4.30 strikes landed per minute, 52% striking accuracy, 3.42 strikes absorbed. For Marcin Prachnio, 2.39 strikes landed per minute, 39% striking accuracy, 2.92 strikes absorbed. When it comes to their grappling, we haven't seen a ton of grappling from either of these guys. Prachnio hasn't secured a takedown in the UFC, nor has he had to defend any takedowns. And for Mike Rodriguez, 38% takedown defense with no takedowns yet in the UFC. So this is a fight that I expect to stay standing. When I look at the odds here, Mike Rodriguez is a minus 235 favorite. It makes sense because Prachnio just looked inept so far in the UFC. Prachnio is plus 195. But I have no desire or want to bet this fight because honestly, I don't think either of these guys are UFC type talents, and it wouldn't surprise me if either of these guys were to get finished. I mean, I know Prachnio has looked quite awful in the UFC so far, but when he fought for one, he was pretty darn successful and had a bunch of finishes there. And it's, one is a legit organization, right? They have some legit talent. So maybe the sneaky bet here is on Prachnio. Now, the one thing I will say, Mike Rodriguez is going to have a reach advantage, and he's definitely the more higher output fighter. So, it's possible that he's able to box up Prachnio. Like I said, I'm not going to be betting this fight. When it comes to DraftKings, Mike Rodriguez is priced up at 8,900. And I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me because really he's had a 2 spot against Jung, 35 spot against Allen. He had that one finish against Milstead, 128 points, and then in his loss to Clark, it was only a 20-point spot. So you're looking at really in 4 fights now in the UFC, he's only been productive in one of them. Now, the thing I will say is like this is a fight that you probably want exposure to, though, because it's a fight where you could certainly see a knockout. Both of these guys have been finished, and they have been able to finish their opponents as well. So if I were to play this fight, I'd probably roster Prachnio at 7,300, which sounds crazy because he's just been so awful in the UFC thus far. But I just, at 8,900, I don't feel comfortable putting Mike Rodriguez in my lineup. I'll probably end up having a little bit of exposure to both of these guys, but in my ideal lineup, I'm going to stay away from this fight. It's just a hard one to stay away from because it's one where you're expecting a finish. So take it for what it's worth, man. I mean, if you want to roll the dice on Rodriguez at 8,900, go ahead, but I think Munhoz at 9,000 is a better play. I think Daniel Rodriguez at 8,700 is a better play. I think Maria Agapova is a better play at 9,300 as well. We'll talk about that. So, all right, so the next fight on the main card here is Maria Agapova versus Shanna Dobson. Maria Agapova is looking like a pretty legitimate prospect in the UFC at this point. I know she only had that one fight against Hannah Cifers, but she was able to make some light work out of Cifers and subbed her via rear naked choke. 9-1 professional record, so that's really solid. Fighting out of Kazakhstan. Shanna Dobson, on the other hand, is now really a UFC veteran at this point, despite the fact that she is 1-3 in the UFC and has looked downright awful. The UFC has decided to roll her back out for this card, which is an interesting one. Agapova is the biggest favorite on this card. No surprise when you're talking about a fighter that she's facing off with that has a 3-4 professional record. That's just absolutely gross. Agapova's minus 1250, Dobson's plus 800. This is one, though, that, if you're just like super rich, Think of it as just like a really quick, easy return on investment. Like, obviously, there's no money to be made here. I mean, I'd probably look at the props for this one. I really like Agapova by submission. That would be the bet that I would be willing to make. But the thing is, Agapova is just a better fighter altogether in literally every aspect of fighting. And I'm going to pull up some of the stats here in this one. Agapova, 3.84 strikes landed per minute, 51% striking accuracy, 4.35 strikes absorbed. For Dobson, 3.63 strikes landed per minute, 34% striking accuracy, 5.42 strikes absorbed. When it comes to grappling, not a lot to talk about here. Dobson, 0% takedown defense, 25% takedown accuracy, 0.39 takedowns per 15 minutes. For Agapova, we're not getting a ton just because she's only had one UFC fight. 42% takedown defense, 0% takedown accuracy, whatever. It doesn't matter. The grappling statistics do not matter in this fight because Agapova, she wouldn't have any trouble taking down Shannon Dobson. If you haven't watched Shannon Dobson fight, and it's nothing against her, I like her, but she's like a school teacher, man. Like, she's not a professional fighter at all. She just looks very raw everywhere. Just raw standing, isn't great preventing takedowns. Once she's on the ground, she's not good at getting back up. And that's scary when you're fighting a legitimate up-and-comer like Agapova, who, you know, I'm just going through her resume here. Rear naked choke, ground and pound, rear naked choke, arm bar, punches, rear naked choke. I mean, for a female fighting in the flyweight division, that's what you like to see, right? You like to see someone that's going to get some finishes, and I think Dobson gets finished here. Dobson was finished most recently 5 months ago when she was knocked out by Priscilla Cachoeira. You know, and you're talking about, that might be one of the worst fights when it comes to the level of skill in a UFC fight that you'll ever see. I mean, Priscilla Cachoeira was just a punching bag for Valentina Shevchenko, Molly McCann, Luana Carolina, just completely destroyed by those three girls, and then she comes out and gets a victory over Shannon Dobson. So that just shows you the level of fighter that we're talking about. So if you're going to bet this fight, just whatever. I mean, if you got 10 G's in the bank and you're looking to make a little bit of money, don't worry. I mean, unless Agapova goes out there and like tears an ACL, and she probably would still beat Dobson with a torn ACL, I'd feel safe betting it. Also, you know, look at the props, man. Look at the unders. Look at victory by submission, or really just any sort of finish, and I like that for Agapova. When it comes to DraftKings here, Agapova is priced up at 9,300, which I don't mind paying on this card. I mean, she had 118 points when she subbed Hannah Cyphers. I wouldn't expect anything less than 95 points at a bare minimum, which on a card like this, there's not a ton of options. Like I've talked about, you have Pedro Munhoz at 9,000. You have Daniel Rodriguez at 8,700 if you really like him, high output fighter. Dwight Grant, who we'll talk about, at 8,800. You know, if you need someone in the high 8s, low 9s, Agapova is certainly a good option because she really should be a shoo-in for at least 100 points. Shannon Dobson at 6,800 is the cheapest fighter on the slate. You know, why would you ever want any exposure to her? 39 points against Muller, 17 against Matzo, 3 against Cachoeira. I mean, she's not even a dart play. I mean, she really honestly should get 0% ownership. You know, at this point, she's just a can in her UFC career. So, which is a shame because she's 31 and I'm sure she's a cool girl, but she's just not a UFC fighter. I wouldn't be surprised if she was cut after this one. All right, so we'll move on to the first fight on the main card, which I think is probably one of the best fights on this card and one that's really being slept on. It's a fight that's taking place in the welterweight division. Takashi Sato versus Daniel Rodriguez. Takashi Sato, fighting out of Japan, 16-3 record. Just fought about 2 months ago where he knocked out a last-minute replacement opponent in Jason Witt, which is a filthy overhand right. He's fighting Daniel Rodriguez, who most recently fought Gabe Green about 2 months ago, and it was just classic Daniel Rodriguez, just really, really slick boxing skills. Daniel Rodriguez so far in the UFC is 2-0, man, right? His first victory came against Tim Means, where that was one where they just slugged back and forth, and eventually Daniel Rodriguez was able to hurt Means and then subbed him with a standing guillotine choke. Super impressive. I mean, Daniel Rodriguez, 12-1, man. This guy's looking like he is the real deal. For Sato, he's now been in the UFC for a little bit. He's 2-1 in the UFC. He knocked out Ben Saunders in his UFC debut. He lost to Bilal Muhammad, who's of course a tough opponent. This is a tough one. I mean, these odds should honestly probably be a little bit closer than they are. Daniel Rodriguez is -185. Takashi Sato is +160. I want to pull up some stats for this fight. Daniel Rodriguez, 8.6 strikes landed per minute, 48% striking accuracy, 6.81 strikes absorbed. For Sato, 3.94 strikes landed, 41% striking accuracy, 5.10 strikes absorbed. When it comes to grappling, Daniel Rodriguez, 1.94 takedowns per 15 minutes, 83% takedown accuracy, 66% takedown defense. And for Sato, 0.79 takedowns per 15 minutes, 50% takedown accuracy, and an 80% takedown defense. I don't expect there to be too much grappling in this fight unless someone gets hurt and resorts to it. What I really like to focus on here are the striking numbers, because Daniel Rodriguez, if there is a hole in his game, it's that he absorbs a lot of strikes. But so far, he's shown that he has an incredible chin. We can't say the same about Takashi Sato. When he fought Bilal Muhammad, Muhammad was able to stagger him. Even when he fought Ben Saunders, and Ben Saunders isn't really a good fighter at this point in his career. When Saunders was able to connect, he was able to stagger Sato. So Takashi Sato, I don't have as much confidence in his chin as I do Daniel Rodriguez. And Daniel Rodriguez, the fact that he's such a high output boxer, 8.6 strikes, and Sato isn't the best defensive striker really scares me. I just talked about how these odds you think should be closer just based on like professional record, resume, experience. You wouldn't think Sato would be +160 and Daniel Rodriguez would be -185. But that just shows you, if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, Vegas expects Daniel Rodriguez here to really come out on top in this one, and I would agree. I like Rodriguez at -185, and I think he could certainly finish Sato. He's going to have a little bit of a size advantage as well. When it comes to DraftKings, Daniel Rodriguez is just a fighter I'm targeting, and I plan to have a ton of exposure to him just because he's a high output fighter and he's reasonably priced at 8,700. So, 105 points against Means, 126 points against Green. He landed 175 strikes in that fight against Green. I mean, this guy is just... I like him a lot. I just like his style of fighting. He is not scared to stand and bang, really. And I know Sato has had the ability to knock out fighters, like opponents, but that one against Jason Witt, I don't know how much stock I put into that because Witt was really not on Sato's level and taking that fight on super short notice. But I mean, if you just go through his resume, I mean, he's had, when he fought for Pancrase, I mean, he's definitely had a ton of finishes. You're not seeing the same level of competition there as you do in the UFC, but Sato's no slouch. It's difficult because generally, Sato would be a guy I would target at that 7,500 price point. I mean, if you look at the statistics, 94 points against Saunders, 23 against Bilal Muhammad, 109 against Witt. You would think he'd be a live dog, and you'd think I'd have really want a lot of exposure to him. But maybe I'm crazy, but I'm just super high on Daniel Rodriguez here. So Takashi Sato, 7,500. I'll probably sprinkle him into some lineups for some GPPs. I expect him to be very high owned as kind of a dart throw here, which is another reason why I don't mind kind of fading him. But yeah, I really like Daniel Rodriguez. I expect him to definitely put up some numbers here. All right, so we will head to the feature prelim, which is taking place in the strawweight division, 115 pounds. Mizuki Inoue versus Amanda Lemos. Let's start with Inoue. She's 14-5. She's only had one fight in the UFC. That fight took place about a year ago, where she won a split decision victory over Yanan Wu. Before that, she fought for Invicta. For Amanda Lemos, she will be making her third UFC appearance. Her first fight against Leslie Smith, she was knocked out. And then in her most recent fight 7 months ago, she was able to submit Miranda Granger. I want to pull up some stats for this fight real quickly, hit on those. We'll start with Lemos, who's averaging 6.55 strikes landed per minute with a 64% striking accuracy. This number is startling, 9 strikes absorbed per minute. For Inoue, 6.2 strikes landed per minute, 45% striking accuracy, 8.2 strikes absorbed. When it comes to grappling, Lemos, 2.59 takedowns per 15 minutes with 100% takedown accuracy, 0% takedown defense. For Inoue, no takedowns, 0% takedown accuracy, 100% takedown defense. I don't think the girl she fought in her UFC debut was much of a threat from a grappling standpoint, so that number doesn't mean too much to me. What's interesting to me is that Inoue is a minus 140 favorite here, and she opened up as a minus 185 favorite, and some money has gone on Lemos, and in my opinion, it's been a smart money. It's smart money that's going on Lemos, because I certainly favor her in this fight. One of the things about Lemos is, she's a 115er that was fighting 135 fighters. Like her fight against Leslie Smith, Leslie Smith had a big size advantage there, so I'm not surprised Leslie Smith 3 years ago was able to knock her out. But if you go back and watch Lemos's fights for Jungle Fight in that organization, I mean, this girl has good striking skills, pretty good boxing skills. I mean, not the most technically defensive fighter. Like, she's definitely willing to take one to give one, but you're going to see some high output from her, which is nice. And for Inoue, it's not really too much different for her either. I mean, I was able to watch a lot of her Invicta fights, and she's got good striking skills. I mean, she beat Viviane Pereira. She's got some victories over some UFC level talent. She also has losses to UFC level talent. She lost to Alexa Grasso in Invicta. She lost to Karolina Kowalkiewicz. She lost to Verna Jandiroba. Now, the thing is, I just think Lemos is used to fighting more powerful strikers, and I think if there's going to be a finish in this fight, it's going to be by Lemos, and it would probably be a sub, because I think her BJJ is definitely better than Inoue's. But I expect this to be a high output striking fight. Those fights can go either way, but I think Lemos is a little bit more of a powerful puncher. So I lean Lemos here. So I'm with the public on this one. Lemos at plus 120 I think is a pretty live dog. When it comes to DraftKings, it's so difficult, because when I was constructing my ideal lineup here, I really wanted to get Lemos in that lineup, but it was difficult for me because there's another dog in that price point that I like, which we're going to talk about, and it's Semmelsberger. And the girl fights, I always tend to be wrong. That's another thing. Like, I know I'm not going to be wrong with Agapova on this one. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that she's going to win her fight. But, like, these toss-up girl fights, man, I feel like I'm always on the wrong side of them. So for DFS, like, I'll probably have some exposure to Lemos. I don't expect to have any exposure at all to Inoue. Inoue at 8,600 is just priced up too high for my liking. But Lemos at 7,600 is a really good alternative to like an Austin Hubbard or a Takashi Sato. Like, I expect Takashi Sato and Austin Hubbard to be the kind of chalk mid to high $7,000 plays. And I think if you're playing in tournaments, you can pivot and use Lemos. And I think she outscores both of them. Like, if you asked me, hey, who do you think scores the most points out of Sato, Lemos, and Hubbard? Rank them in order. I'd probably go Lemos 1, Sato 2, and Hubbard 3. So Lemos is a good pivot play, and I'll definitely have some exposure to Lemos in DraftKings. All right, we're going to move on to the next fight here, which is Austin Hubbard versus Joe Solecki. This fight is taking place in the lightweight division. Austin Hubbard's 12-4 as a professional. Joe Solecki is 9-2. Austin Hubbard coming off of a victory about 2 months ago against Max Rosekopf. That was a big, interesting fight where Rosekopf dominated the first round, was able to take down Hubbard pretty much relentlessly, and then in the second round was just gassed out and got smoked on the feet, and then refused to go back out in the third round, and ultimately retired on the stool, taking his first loss. I hate to talk shit on people, but I mean, dude, it's your first loss, man. Suck it up, like, whatever. Anyway, before that, he lost a fight to Marco Madsen, where Madsen, again, in those first 2 rounds, was able to just relentlessly take down Austin Hubbard. Now, Hubbard looked good in the third round there. I think Madsen started to burn out, but it really was just too late. He was already down two rounds to none. He does have victories over Kyle Prepolik, and he has that loss to Davi Ramos in his UFC debut. Tough debut for our man Austin Hubbard. For Joe Solecki, he's had 1 UFC fight. He beat Matt Wyman. He was able to take him down a bunch. That one went the distance. And he was also on the Contender Series, where he had a submission guillotine choke victory against James Wallace to get into the UFC. So we'll go over some stats in this fight. Austin Hubbard, 3.53 strikes landed per minute, 48% striking accuracy, 2.53 strikes absorbed. For Joe Solecki, 3.67 strikes landed per minute, 76% striking accuracy, 0.64 strikes absorbed. When it comes to grappling, Austin Hubbard, 0.82 takedowns per 15 minutes, 60% takedown accuracy, 50% takedown defense. For our man Joe Solecki, 3.99 takedowns per 15, 83% takedown accuracy, 0% takedown defense. It's just because he didn't really have to prevent any takedowns in his UFC debut. So how do I feel about this fight? Well, I feel like this is a fight where people are going to have a ton of recency bias. The odds, Solecki is the favorite at -135. Hubbard's plus 115, but I was looking on Tapology, and like 70% of the votes think that Austin Hubbard is going to win. And, I can understand it because he fought a really good wrestler and grappler in Max Rosekopf in his most recent fight, and he was able to win that one and pull out a victory there. But I think the difference here is Solecki has better jiu-jitsu skills and a better gas tank than Rosekopf did. Rosekopf was making his UFC debut in that fight. He had never fought anyone on Austin Hubbard's level. Joe Solecki already has a UFC victory under his belt. He's been on the Contender Series. He's fought some tough guys. So I don't expect to see Joe Solecki running out of stamina in this fight and then just falling apart standing against Austin Hubbard. And that's the other thing. Rosekopf was strictly a wrestler. Now, I know Solecki, he's primarily a grappler, and he does have good jiu-jitsu skills, but he's definitely more well-versed technically from a striking background than Rosekopf was. at the end of the day, despite the fact that Hubbard won his most recent fight against Roskopf, I've now watched multiple fights in a row between Madsen and Roskopf against Hubbard where they've had success taking him down at some point in the fight. 50% takedown defense for Austin Hubbard doesn't look good against a guy with really good grappling skills in Joe Solecki. So I really like Solecki in this fight, and he's only priced up at 8,400. And I think I already talked about how I think Hubbard's going to be a chalk play, a chalk dog on this card. I think this is where you can pivot and put Solecki in your lineup. I think he's a better play than a guy like Alonzo Menefield or Ike Villanueva. I also like him more than Carlton Minus, so I will definitely have some exposure to Joe Solecki. As far as Austin Hubbard goes, 7,800 price point's not bad. So even though I think he's going to be chalk, and I don't think he wins the fight, I would be lying if I told you that I won't have a lineup out there with Austin Hubbard in it. I will have a little bit of exposure to Austin Hubbard. Fine, I admit it. But here's the thing with this fight. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So if Austin Hubbard is able to prevent these takedowns and grind out another victory against an elite level grappler, then I'll stop doubting him, and moving forward, I'll be giving him a little bit more love. But for this week, I'm going to get back to Solecki. I think it's a little bit of a contrarian play for DK. I think you should hop on board with that assessment. All right, so we'll move on to the next fight here, which is Dwight Grant versus Kalen Bourne. Dwight Grant was originally scheduled to fight Jared Gooden, I believe was his name. Let me pull that up. Yeah, Jared Gooden, an individual who was supposed to be making his UFC debut. Gooden dropped off the fight last minute, and he's been replaced with Kalen Bourne. This fight's taking place in the welterweight division. Dwight Grant has a record of 10-2. And he is 2-1 in the UFC. Also has a victory on the Contender Series. For Kalen Bourne, he's making his UFC debut here. Fought for LFA, fought for Shamrock FC. He's got a record of 7-1. Let's talk about Dwight the Body Snatcher Grant. Good size, 6'1", 76.5-inch reach. 171 pounds, of course, because it's the welterweight division. I don't even know why I brought that. I'm just reading here. And, of course, trains with AKA. And the guys at AKA really like this kid. They think that this kid could be something special. Now, he lost to Zach Otto. It was a split decision, tough fight. Went back and forth. It wasn't... It was a grind, right? It wasn't a high-output fight. But then after that, man, knocked out Carlos Pedersoli. And then, he had another tough fight with Alan Jouban, and he got the victory in that one, and it was a split decision victory, and some people thought Jouban won that fight. But Jouban, he's not an easy opponent. So, in fact, none of Grant's opponents so far have been. I mean, Pedersoli had a record of 11-2. Zach Otto has been in the UFC now for quite a while, 16-6 record. So, this will definitely be a step down in competition for Dwight Grant in this fight. For Kalen Bourne, I got to be honest with you, I didn't know much about him. I had to do some research, watch some videos of him fighting. One of the things that I will say is it looks like he's got some pretty good jiu-jitsu skills. If the fight can get to the mat, I was able to see him pull out a rear naked choke. He had a guillotine choke, so he's got some good submission skills, but his striking just didn't look natural. I think he's got a little bit to learn there. And then he's also going to be at a pretty significant size disadvantage here. I mean, Grant is 6'1", Bourne is 5'8". Now, Bourne has a solid reach, 74 inches, so Grant's only got a 2.5 reach advantage, but I just don't see Bourne having much success taking this fight short notice. I don't even have odds yet for this fight because it was just announced, and I real quickly looked up, watched some Kalen Bourne fights. I would expect him to be a pretty significant, especially taking this fight on short notice, a pretty significant underdog. I mean, I would assume he's probably going to be anywhere between plus 400 and plus 600 dog. I would expect Grant to probably be somewhere around minus 500 to minus 600, maybe even more than that. So, not much to talk about when it comes to betting this fight. But I do want to talk about it when it comes to DFS, because the nice thing is we're going to get Dwight Grant here at a little bit of a discount. He was already priced up for his fight against Gooden at 8,800. But from what I understand, Gooden is probably a little bit more of a tougher matchup for Dwight Grant and Kalen Bourne. So I really like Dwight Grant here. I know we haven't seen a ton of output from him in the UFC thus far. Only 18 points against Otto and 49 against Joban. He did have that knockout victory against Petter Soli where he put up 110, but I think he could easily finish Bourne here. Bourne has never been finished before, so if it doesn't happen, don't crucify me, but pretty confident that Grant should come out with the victory here either way. So I really like him at 8,800. I don't have price points yet on DraftKings for Kalen Bourne. We'll probably get those by Friday. I would expect Bourne to be somewhere in the low sevens. Just don't have any interest in him because he's taking the fight on such short notice. He's going to be athletically disadvantaged. He's going to be disadvantaged from a striking standpoint. There's a size disadvantage. I mean, if you're going to pencil Bourne into your lineup, you're just hoping for a Hail Mary submission. And I don't think we are going to see one of those. All right, so the next fight here on the prelims is Ike Villanueva versus Jordan Wright. Jordan Wright, if you guys don't know who he is, he's the Beverly Hills Ninja. And the Beverly Hills Ninja was on the Contender Series. He was knocked out by Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, I believe. Am I crazy? Am I crazy for saying that? Let me look that up. I was overturned to a no contest. Either way, he's going up against Ike Villanueva. Villanueva's fought at heavyweight. He'll be fighting at light heavyweight in this one against Jordan Wright. Jordan Wright is 10-0. So, I mean, so far he's undefeated in his professional career. He's been fighting with LFA where he's had some success. He subbed Craig Wilkerson, rear naked choke. He knocked out Gabriel Chico. Hey man, the Beverly Hills Ninja looks like he has some skills. For Ike Villanueva, he just made his UFC debut 3 months ago against Chase Sherman and was annihilated in that one. Now Sherman did look improved, but I still don't think Sherman's like a great UFC fighter. So Villanueva's dropping down at 205, which is probably the right thing to do because he's only 6'1" with a 73-inch reach. He'll actually be the smaller fighter in this fight. Jordan Wright's 6'2", 77-inch reach. Again, short notice fight here because Villanueva was supposed to be fighting Jorge Gonzalez, and for the second time now, Jorge Gonzalez has dropped out of a fight here in the UFC. So we still haven't got to see his UFC debut. I have some stats in this fight because Villanueva has that one UFC fight, and I want to talk about this. That fight against Chase Sherman, 8.77 strikes absorbed per minute. Goodness gracious. And only a 29% striking accuracy. So, I mean, I don't like Ike Villanueva here at all. Now, he was a slight favorite against Jorge Gonzalez, and I had Gonzalez in just about all of my DraftKings lineups. So I was kind of bummed when he dropped off. But we'll see what happens with Jordan Wright because, Jordan Wright's definitely going to be the smaller fighter. I mean, he doesn't typically fight at 205. So you have a heavyweight dropping down to light heavyweight, and then you have an 85er dropping up to light heavyweight. That scares me. This is another fight where I don't think I have odds for it yet. No, I don't because it just was put together. So I would expect Villanueva to still be a favorite. I don't love taking short notice fighters really ever, but I don't think Villanueva is really UFC level caliber fighter. His victories for Fury, he fought a guy, Rashad Coulter, we saw, he's another guy that stunk in the UFC. Roger Narvaez, 8-3. Juan Torres, 8-14. Patrick Miller, 5-8. Like those victories are not impressive. At least Jordan Wright has fought decent competition in LFA. It scares me that he's really going up in weight, but it makes sense because it's such a short notice fight. So I don't know. Who knows? If Jordan Wright ends up being like a plus 350 dog, he's not a bad person to put a little bit of money on, since Villanueva probably shouldn't even be in the UFC. When it comes to DraftKings, I only have a price for Ike Villanueva at 8,200, which I think is ridiculous. I will not have any exposure to him. Now, could he knock out Jordan Wright? Yes. Villanueva, if you look, man, he's one of those guys that either finishes you or tends to get finished. And he went on a nice little streak there. I mean, he had a knockout victory in Bellator, some knockout victories with Fury. So it's very similar to like the Mike Rodriguez Prochnio fight, right? Like he could knock out Jordan Wright. He could also get completely knocked out, man. So like it's a fight where you want to have some exposure, but man, I'm not going to like tell you like, oh, you have to have Marcin Prochnio in your lineup or Ike Villanueva. Like, I just don't feel that confident. Like, and just to talk a little bit about last week when we talked about Dalkis and Parker Porter, and I talked about how, I figured someone would get knocked out in that fight. You probably wanted some exposure to it. And I said, I like Dalkis at 7,700 just because he's the cheaper of the two. The cards that I did hit, the tournaments that I did win last week that brought me back so that I was able to break even were the cards that had Dalkis, right? And, that's what kind of makes my job here a little bit difficult in the franchise, because I'm trying to give you guys cards that have winners, right? And if I don't feel 100% confident in a fighter like Dalkis or Ike Villanueva or Jordan Wright, I don't want to throw them in my ideal lineup and give you guys the wrong impression that, I really am backing this guy. When I put together these lineups, man, these lineups are supposed to display like my confidence. But sometimes with DraftKings, it's not about that. Like, if you're just going to play one tournament entry, the chances of you winning are quite low. So, you want to get a few lineups in there and make sure you have exposure to some of these fights that have the potential to rack up a ton of points. And this is one of those. So I'm not going to tell you to have Jordan Wright or Ike Villanueva in what I would consider like my ideal lineup, but I'm certainly going to have exposure to probably both of these guys come Saturday night. All right, so we'll move on to the next fight here, which is taking place in the welterweight division, and this is a fight that I am really looking forward to. Both these guys making their UFC debut. Matthew Semelsberger versus Carlton Minus. Carlton Minus fighting out of Alaska and fought for AFC. Also had a fight on PFL 2 years ago where he fought Rick Story. He took that fight on short notice and was subbed, but Rick Story, man, a UFC veteran. For Matthew Semelsberger, he's on a nice little 3-fight win streak. He knocked out Richard Petishnak, Chris Gritalo, and Zolkaranian Kamachevkov. Yeah, for CFFC, Maverick MMA. I mean, he's been on the regional scene. Matthew Semelsberger, though, is a legit athlete, man. This is a guy that played football in college. I forget the college that he played ball at, but he was a DB. I think he was a safety. Good size for a welterweight, 6'1". And 6-2 professional record. Now, he was knocked out 2 years ago by Jerome Featherstone in Shogun. Don't know too much about that promotion. And he also has a loss to Darren Costa, Darce choke. So we've seen Matthew Semmelsberger get finished. For Carlton Minus, he's 10-1. He's looked good. His most recent fight was 5 months ago, where he won unanimous decision versus Sean Ellis up for the AFC. Like I mentioned, he fought 2 years ago against Rick Story and was subbed. But he's got a victory over Justin Buchholz. Yes, the Justin Buchholz. Decision victory over Buchholz. Decision victory over Colin Reuter. It's got a knockout against Jesse Kuber. This is going to be a fun fight, right? Like, that welterweight division's usually a good division where you're going to see these guys stand and bang. I was able to watch both of these fighters, and in all honesty, I was more impressed with Semmelsberger. I think Semmelsberger's striking looks really crisp, has some nice knees, just flows really well, and I think he's the more powerful puncher of the two. When it comes to the odds here, Vegas has Semmelsberger as a slight dog. Just looking at this, Semmelsberger is only plus 105 at this point. So he opened up at a plus 125. Some money rushed in on him. And again, I'm going to agree with the public on this one. I like Semmelsberger. He also has that slight size advantage. He's 6'1" to Minus's 5'10" height. I'm really feeling Semmelsberger in this one. And I would feel pretty comfortable putting some money on him at plus 105. When it comes to DraftKings, Semmelsberger at 7,700, I really love. So we talked about like the Hubbard, Sato, Lemos, Amanda Lemos, Semmelsberger. Like, you're gonna have to pick one of those guys to put in your lineup, and you might have a combination of two depending on how you build your lineup out. I really like Semmelsberger because I feel like this is a fight I want to target. It's similar to like the last fight that we were just talking about with Villanueva and Wright. Now, Villanueva these guys aren't as much as glass cannons as Villanueva, but I feel like I can get a better read in this fight. And I think Semmelsberger is the guy that I'm comfortable with here, and I think that he's a guy that could get a finish on Carlton Minus and hopefully land a pretty big shot. So I will definitely have Matthew Semi the Jedi Semmelsberger in my DraftKings lineups. I'll have some exposure to him. Carlton Minus, not bad at 8,500. Not bad at all at 8,500. But I like Selecki more at 8,400. So I might have a little bit of exposure to Minus, but not a ton. All right, and we're gonna move on to the first fight of the night, which is a fight that is taking place in the bantamweight division between Mark Striegel and Timur Valiev. Timur Valiev was scheduled for a fight about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago at this point. No, was it that? No, he was supposed to fight Jamal Emmers a couple weeks ago. I'm crazy. Anyway, we talked a lot about Timur Valiev in that fight. He's 16-2. He's been on a really nice fight win streak, had some nice victories on the PFL. He beat some impressive fighters like Bekbulat Magomedov on the PFL, Max Koga, Jose Naldo Silva. I mean, this Timur Valiev guy is someone that I think the UFC is pretty high on. He'll be fighting against Mark Striegel, who is making his UFC debut as well. Now, Striegel is fighting out of the Philippines, and I believe he fought with ONE. Yes, he did fight with ONE FC. And he had some notable victories. He actually has a victory over Kai Kara France. So that's a name that you can recognize, a ranked UFC fighter. Outside of that, the thing with Mark Striegel here is he's got some good submission skills. But when I'm looking at some of these subs, they're like guillotine choke, scarf hold arm lock, key lock, scarf hold arm lock. Like, those types of submissions work really well against like opponents that you just have a significant grappling or strength or jiu-jitsu advantage of. Like, you don't see scarf hold arm lock chokes in the UFC. Like, the fighters are too good to tap out to that type of submission attempt. It's not like it's a triangle or Darce choke or rear naked choke that, those are chokes that are really difficult to get out of. For Valiev, my problem with him though is he's kind of a decision merchant at this point. He's really good striker, has good wrestling, really well-rounded fighter, and he's a huge favorite in this fight. He's minus 525, and it makes sense. Just think he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think that he has more experience as well, and more experience fighting more experienced opponents. So I don't know where Striegel has an advantage here. I think Valiev is the more polished striker. I think Valiev is the better grappler. I think, you could argue Striegel probably has better jiu-jitsu skills, but is he ever going to be able to get Valiev on the ground? I don't see it. I expect this one to stay standing. The thing is, I haven't seen a ton of power from Valiev, and you're talking about a guy in Striegel who's going to be 2 inches taller and is used to fighting fighters that are in that 145-pound division. So, this isn't a fight that I bet money on just because there's not a ton of money to be made. Even if you bet the overs, the odds for that don't look great, and that's what I would probably lean. When it comes to DraftKings, Valiev's priced up at 9,100, which I absolutely hate. I expect him to win the fight, and you're hoping for a lot of output, and we might see that, but I just don't see an opportunity for a finish. And if I'm paying 9,000, I want a good chance at a finish, or at least, a main event fight where there's going to be a ton of output. For Striegel, he's one of the cheapest fighters on the card at 7,100. He's not a bad dart throw. Like, in all honesty, he's not a bad dart throw. But is he a better dart throw than Prachnio at 7,300 in a fight that you think would be a finish? Is he a better dart throw than Frankie Edgar at 7,200? Who's, if that fight goes the distance, he's going to get 5 rounds in? No. So I don't expect to have a ton of exposure to Striegel. The only reason why I say that he's not a bad dart throw is because he has a size advantage, and we have seen him have the ability to finish fights. Wouldn't expect it here because I think Valiev is a tough customer. But not going to have a ton of exposure to either of those guys. So I want to talk about how difficult this week it's been to put together a lineup for you guys. And I'm going to be honest, the lineup that I put out in this video might not be, really the lineup that I end up entering in these really big GPPs. And the reason for it is because there's been so much turnover on this card that I don't even have price points for everyone. So I put together a little bit of a half-assed lineup for you guys here just so that you guys can kind of see what I'm looking at. And we'll start at the top here at 9,300, Maria Agapova. When I was constructing these lineups, I just continued to have salary remaining over. And I had to make a decision about what I was going to do with that salary. And I think Agapova is just the safest fighter on this card, and I think we're going to see a first round finish from her. Hopefully it's not too early and it's not like a 95 banger. Hopefully she gets some strikes in first, or at least a couple takedowns, and she puts up over 100 points. But yeah, it's a guaranteed victory there. So I have Agapova at 9,300. I have our man, the body snatcher, Dwight Grant at 8,800, facing a short notice opponent who he's just going to be athletically more gifted and more experienced, a better fighter all around at 8,800. You have to have him in your lineup. Daniel Rodriguez, D-Rod at 8,700. It's hard not to have this guy in your lineup. You want exposure to that Sato Rodriguez fight, and I give the lean to Rodriguez in that fight. I think he's got a stronger chin. I think it holds up. I think he could finish Sato, and even if he doesn't finish Sato, I think he will land with more output. Next fighter that I have in my lineup here is Ovince St. Preux at 7,900, and this one was just so difficult for me because, like I said, there's some other fighters in that price point. It's a shame that Jorge Gonzalez is no longer on this card, because I would have been playing Gonzalez all day, 10 out of 10 times over St. Preux. But St. Preux at 7,900, I like him because I think Menafield could gas out, and I think St. Preux could ultimately submit Menafield. After that, I have Semmelsberger at 7,700, and again, this is a tough one. For Semmelsberger, it really came down to, do I want Semmelsberger in my lineup or Lemos? Lemos is probably the more high output fighter, probably the safer fighter, but Semmelsberger has the ability to get a finish, and that's what you're looking for when you're playing tournaments. So if I was playing cash, probably go Lemos. Playing tournaments, going with Semmelsberger, so I have him in my lineup. Last fighter here is going to be Frankie Edgar at 7,200. I just don't expect Pedro Munhoz to finish Frankie Edgar. And I could be completely wrong about that. I don't know. This might be the last time that I trail Frankie Edgar. But if this fight goes 5 rounds, Frankie Edgar should have the ability to pay up to that 7,200 price point, right? And if he pulls out a victory, you could see 115, 120 points. So I really like him here at 7,200 this week. All right, guys. Good luck this weekend with your GPP lineups in DraftKings, or if you're playing cash. Let's try to make some money this week, man. Let's try to make some money. I need it. I need it this weekend. I've been killing it in the NBA lately. Done well in baseball as well. We need to get back on the right track with MMA after last week. Really just breaking even. If you guys could like this video, subscribe this video, that way I can continue to not feel like a loser and put out this content. I know somebody's listening and cares about my opinion. I really appreciate that. So, all right, you guys enjoy your weekend and good luck.